At a time when social media is being utilized to coordinate protests against the domination of our economy, our government, and our society by corporations and the very wealthy individuals who profit most from them, Simon Mainwaring, today's guest, sees that same social media as part of a hopeful path to save society from capitalism's worst excesses. A social media expert with global experience with many of the world's biggest brands, Nike, Toyota, Motorola, among others, he offers a visionary new practice in which brands leverage social media to earn consumer goodwill, loyalty, and profit, while creating a third pillar of sustainable social change through conscious contributions from customer purchases. Can such innovative private sector partnerships answer one of the most pressing issues facing business and thought leaders today? How to practice capitalism in a way that satisfies the need for both profit and a healthy, sustainable, equitable, and just planet. Now, the goal of We First, which is his idea for this and the name of his first book, is a sustainable practice of capitalism based on the belief that selfish me-first thinking hurts our businesses as well as the lives of millions of people around the globe. And it asserts that a brighter future depends on integration of profit and purpose within the private sector. And to achieve this, companies and customers must become partners in social change to build a better world. Now, some of the questions we'll get to could such innovative partnerships with shared goals practice capitalism in a way that satisfies that need? How realistic is his vision at a time when greed just seems to keep consolidating its gains? And how much difference could it make even if successful? Would it really be enough to create, let's say, a tipping point in the right direction? What has he seen, Simon Mainwaring, in working with these brands and these corporations that makes him talk about his vision as a likely and a possible alternative? Simon Mainwaring, my guest today, is a founder and CEO of We First, a social branding consultancy. He's a former Nike creative at Wieden & Kennedy, Portland, Oregon, and worldwide creative director for Motorola at Ogilvy. He's a member of the GMI Digital Advisory Board, the advisory board of the Center for Public Diplomacy at the Annenberg School, Ad Age's Power 150, and a contributor to Fast Company, Huffington Post, Mashable, Good Magazine, and Forbes.com. His first book, as I said, is We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you so much for having me, Terence, and thanks to everyone for listening.
I like for listeners to get a feel for the people behind the ideas and the work that we talk about for most of the time on here. And so how would you briefly describe your path to the work that you're doing today, and be willing to cite mentors or turning points or moments of decision?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm Australian, as you can probably tell by the accent, and I started off my career as a lawyer. And so I came to the world with a sense of right and wrong, perhaps, that one would hope would come from that sort of training. But then I moved into the advertising world, and I worked in Australia, then London, and then the US. And I worked on large brands, and, you know, when you work on things like Nike, you work on the Olympics and World Cup and these large movements. So I then found myself, after 10 or 20 years in this career, at a bit of a loss. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was walking around my backyard in Los Angeles, and like many people who may be catching the tube or the metro to work, or you're stuck in traffic, I was walking around my backyard saying, oh my God, is this it? Is this it? I mean, really, is it just more of the same? And that was the contribution of my time here. And then at the same time, I had a personal crisis, in a sense, that I went to my kitchen here in Los Angeles one morning. I went to the answering machine, and there were 5 messages waiting. And there were 5 messages from my mother, my sister, and it was saying, basically, your father needs to talk to you, and on the last phone call, he'd died, and I'd missed the chance to say goodbye to him. And I hadn't seen him for 5 years because I'd been running around doing all those important things that none of us can remember, anymore now. And that, as a father, I have 2 daughters, that as a father made me very mindful of my time here on the planet. You sort of go, well, what was the point of me being here? And I was already at a loss personally. And then finally, in that context of sort of personal and professional loss, I read the transcript to a speech that Bill Gates gave at the World Economic Forum, his creative capitalism speech, in which he said to the World Economic Forum and then later to the UN, government and philanthropy can't fix the world on their own. We need the private sector to get involved. And that, to me, not even as an ad guy, that just struck me as self-evident. All these billions of transactions and dollars that are changing hands each day, surely they can not only serve the interests of shareholders and the CEOs and the employees, but also the well-being of society at large. And so I decided to write this book. And, when you're a dad and you're working and all these other things, it took 3 or 4 years to get there, but it came out in June this year. So that was the journey.
Okay, very, very good. What do you mean? I gave some of it in the intro, but if I asked you, or if I sat next to you on a plane, and I said, what do you mean, we first?
We first is a new way of looking at the world, which is a tonic to the me first mentality that has informed all our lives. It's not just Wall Street and corporations who have approached things with a me first mentality. We as consumers, whether it's to try and fulfill the American dream or keep up with the Joneses, we've also overconsumed, as we saw so dramatically up through 2007 and so on. And the new austerity is actually a reaction to that. And then thirdly, the way we treated the planet, in a sense that we've all looked after our own needs at the expense of the planet at large. And my reaction is no more than any other person out there who's saying, wow, this whole system, the way we're running it, is unsustainable. If we have a car and we keep driving it into the ground and never service it, we can't be surprised when it breaks down. And we saw, in economic terms, a very near massive breakdown in 2008 and the global economic meltdown that followed. So we first...
Well, I'd say, by the way, that the people in the back seat
yeah, the people in the back seat are
still
feeling it. And the kids are like, Mom and Dad, let me out. Let me out.
Yeah.
That MapQuest, I'm not sure it's telling us the right way to go.
Exactly.
But so we first is a new way of looking at the world which turns on the idea or the awareness that we now live in a mutually dependent global community. How do we know that? Yes, we can talk to someone in real time in China on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it might be. So social media connects us intimately like never before. But what 2008 taught me was what happens on Wall Street affects Main Street, affects our homes, our jobs, our healthcare, our hopes. It affects banks in Iceland. It affects people on the ground in Greece. It affects stock markets in the Middle East. And suddenly, we already had the internationalization of currency and all these sort of economic drivers that sort of wove us together. But suddenly, in a very direct, real daily experience, we became aware that we're all in this together. And so we first is a reframing of business, of leadership, of employee engagement, of marketing, peculiar to the reality of the world that we live in. And there's a lot of people in the corporate world that may not like to hear this, but a global community requires an expanded definition of self-interest. If what we do here affects someone on the other side of the world, and vice versa, we can no longer exclusively look after ourselves and not expect that come back to hurt us in the end.
I have long said that what we lack so much in our economics and our politics is long-term thinking and big-picture view, and that it seems to me, and this is going back to what you just said, that people have a certain circle of concern, and for some people, it's them. That's it. It stops right here.
Right.
For some, it's their family, them and their family, them and their company, them and their neighborhood, them and their church, them and their sports team. But that for us to actually turn things around, that circle of concern has to reflect the reality you're talking about.
It has to expand, and it's not entirely our fault in the sense that I think, as technology has driven us to be sort of intimate at arm's length in some ways and spread us out all over the world, we've lost that equivalent of the village well or the campfire where we came together and got a palpable sense of community that really constantly reminded us that we're in this together, that we're sort of mutually dependent. And so as we've all gone about our merry ways and sort of tried to outdo each other and been encouraged by the entrepreneurship and innovation and sort of expectation of capitalism in a sense, to always do better and to climb over the back of others and so on, we've got to the point where we're failing alone and now we need to succeed together. Because the scale of the challenges we face cannot be met by the current scale of the solutions we provide. And there's only one really large untapped resource that we haven't tapped into, and that's the private sector. And, I believe that it's a turning point because even brands can't survive in societies that fail. So companies need to sit there and go, our middle class is disappearing. Our customer base is disappearing. We've got 1 in 6 Americans below the government-set poverty line.
I have certainly read that whether they've said it, whether they've admitted it and spoken it, or you merely see it reflected in their behavior, that some of the corporations have realized they don't need the American middle class. That they can replace the American middle class with middle classes elsewhere. And, I mean, what you said was true until 20 years ago or so.
Absolutely. I mean, sadly, but sort of not surprisingly, what you see a lot of large corporations do is going where the money is. Emerging markets are growing anywhere between 15 and 17%, while the US is like 1.4%. Why would they not put their money there? But again, this is basically transplanting a short-term strategy somewhere else. And ultimately, whether that timeline is 6 months here in the United States or 2 years here in the United States or 5 years globally, there's a point of no return.
I see. In other words, you'll get yourself some other form of short-term gain.
You'll get some other form of short-term gain, but there's a parallel path going on right now. One is that companies are serving their own self-interest because their incentive schemes haven't changed and they're still discharging their responsibilities to shareholders and so on. They're acting pretty much as if it was the 90s still. Yet at the same time, social media has come along and given citizens and customers a voice. And what that does is it accelerates the tension between companies serving their own self-interest at the cost of everybody else's well-being. Because those who are being disenfranchised, those who are losing their economic security, are actually getting louder and louder in their voice or their cry for change. And this is no longer a theoretical exercise. If you look at the Bank of America's debit card, if you look at the pushback against Netflix with Quickster, if you look at the Occupy Wall Street movement, if you look at one lady raising 300,000 people for an online petition, against Bank of America, I mean, these are the tools that were never available to regular citizens or customers before.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that those who have been left out actually do have more of a voice than they used to. That once you're in social media, there's very little cost of entry into social media, and once you're into it, you've got a voice and you may have allies.
Well, they don't just find their voice; they find each other.
That's what I'm saying,
and that's what's so powerful. And in 2007, in the context of a good economy, it might not have been so dramatic, its effect, because people would be tweeting about innocuous things like their movie or their latest thing they bought. But in the context of an acute economy where 1 in 7 Americans rely on food stamps, where real unemployment is between 16 and 20%, people are giving up that culture of distraction where all they cared about was their next acquisition or their favorite TV show or their favorite sporting team and saying, enough. This isn't okay with us. And if you want us to support you, corporation or brand, with our dollars, with our buying power, then we want you to be socially responsible in return.
Okay, I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Simon MAINWARING, author of We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World. You can learn more at We First Branding. That's one word, wefirstbranding.com, or at simonmainwaring.com, and that's Simon as it sounds, and Mainwaring is MAINWARING. One question I want to ask up front, because otherwise I'll forget, is that in the depiction of capitalism gone astray, are you describing capitalism as practiced everywhere, or the particularly unregulated form that's emerged in the U.S. over the past 40 years? I, for instance, love to point out the example of Germany, very successful, right now having its Eurozone problems, but a very successful exporting country, either number 1 or 2, depending on currency values, where for every corporation with 2,000 or more employees, 50% of the directors are elected by the workers. That's a very different capitalism than here.
Well, capitalism is a sort of a complex topic in itself, in the sense that there's many, many variations of how it's practiced, and really the only unifying quality to it is the right to private ownership. But it's practiced in many ways around the world, whether it's Asia and Europe.
And one of the things, see if you agree with me, that one of the things that seems to be one of those variations is who it considers the stakeholders. And as we say in America, it's mostly the stockholders.
Well, that is the greatest challenge right now. I don't believe anything will change, and I believe the vision of We First will fail if we do not, as consumers, assume a right or responsibility to drive the change we want to see in the world. And the way that has to happen is like has to meet like. Customers have to impact the bottom line of corporations. Why? Because their incentive schemes haven't changed.
Now, again, are you saying U.S. or globally?
I am saying U.S. specifically, but globally. This conversation has is taking place in the UK, obviously, as you see with the riots. If you see what's happening in Greece.
And UK is one of the ones whose corporations are most similar to the US.
They are probably most similar in the UK, but there are interesting things happening in Northern Europe right now, to your point, which is that, there are corporate incentive schemes that are now rewarding directors on the basis of their reduction in carbon footprint. So in the same way that you're saying employees elect directors, you can actually reward them, incentivize them. So what I'd love to see happen is that the same competitive dynamic that drives self-interest has a different reward system or incentive scheme behind it. So you can still engage that pathological competitive side of you, but with smarter interests at heart.
Right. No, I think one of the things in most of my conversations over the last couple of years with economists, with Paul Krugman, Joseph Stiglitz, Simon Johnson, William Greider, et cetera, the recurring thing is that the incentives and the risks are just way off base. Right. And what you're pointing to there is that the drives, the human nature drives, will respond to incentives, and they will relate to risks. And we just have to realign those incentives so they serve the greater good.
Absolutely, because, the GDP is not the best measure of the well-being of society. It doesn't factor in all the social aspects and psychological consequences and dysfunctions of family that result from the inequality of wealth. It also rewards arguably negative things, that if everyone's sitting in traffic all day using more fuel, and more money is being spent on fuel, then the economy is doing better.
Divorces are just excellent for the GDP. Hurricanes.
And that's why, you see people like Joseph Stiglitz, and you also see, and President Sarkozy, and you also see the Happy Planet Index, these other explorations of what's the best way to measure the well-being of society. And it's interesting, the current formula, the GDP, is sort of symptomatic of the larger problem we're talking about today, because it writes out the human dimension to the economic equation. It only looks at the bottom line, the dollars and cents, but it doesn't look at the impact on the lives of people and their quality of life. And I think that's the shift we're seeing, not out of a sudden newfound well-intendedness, but a desire to survive.
One of the things that strikes me is your great deal of what you're basing this in is that corporations will respond to the pressures of people, to the feelings of people, and so on. Now, how do you hold that, which I would love to believe, against the fact that the very banks who took the whole world down in 2007, 2008, certainly there's no secret they did it. It isn't like people didn't notice. It isn't like people aren't upset. It isn't like pundits, authors, the public, everyone's. And yet their behavior in terms of bonuses, in terms of fighting the reforms that you would have thought would actually have saved them from themselves, you get where I'm going.
Absolutely. I think that we're at probably 3 p.m. on the first day of a week of change. And that week is characterized by three things. One is a new period of transparency that has never existed in terms of business before. If you look at WikiLeaks as a dramatic example, there's no such thing as privileged information anymore. And really, what the Internet has done is it's basically opened the books on so many practices that we weren't aware of. As long as we were happy having a holiday or having a car or having a job, we didn't really care or spend too much time inquiring as to how much money was being made at the top of the food chain. But now that everyone's in such acute pain and that information is available on the web and there's new transparency like ever before, suddenly this process of change is happening. The first stage of that is the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Okay, so I do want you to tell me though, as you were writing, and we will talk more about Occupy Wall Street and what that means. But as you were writing your book, you said it took you 3 years. Mm-hmm. You saw the crash happen. You saw here you're writing about your belief that the corporations, that their brands matter and they will respond. And then you see, now Bank of America withdrew its debit charge, but they didn't do much else. In other words, that was to them one little thing, but that wasn't their corporate behavior. That wasn't how they're dealing with foreclosures and so on. But you saw brands like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, American Express, all of those. Their the fact that people canned push against them didn't seem to affect their behavior at all. You're writing the book saying this is what's going to save us. Were you surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised. And you have to imagine when I had these ideas in the first place, it was the end of 2007. So the president hadn't been elected by Connected Citizens yet. There was no BP oil spill. There was no Pepsi Refresh project. There was no Arab Spring revolution. So it was fascinating to watch this unfold.
So you're saying a lot of things bore you out.
A lot of things bore me out as I was writing it. And I would have done it a lot quicker. I didn't have so many other things to do, like, paying the bills. But, since then, I would draw a contrast in the context of this week of change, and we're being on day one of that. Now we're seeing the rise of CEOs like Howard Schultz of Starbucks, who's turning around and saying he's now got 140 CEOs to withhold campaign donations until the gridlock in D.C. is ended. And he's also said he can no longer wait for government to fuel job creation, so he's done this partnership with credit unions that allow people to go into Starbucks to make a donation that will support, through the credit unions, startups and small entrepreneurs to basically get America working again. That is absolutely unheard of 5 years ago, that you would hear a CEO of a major global corporation saying no to DC, saying no to campaign donations, just especially after the Supreme Court decision in which, companies were qualified as human beings and there's no limit to what they can donate. And then thirdly, to actually take it upon themselves to help fund the rise of small businesses. So this is one small indicator as to where this conversation is going, but it must be viewed in company with the Occupy Wall Street movement, the awareness of empowerment that came out of the Arab Spring revolutions, the increased transparency that's coming through WikiLeaks and all these other, attacks that are going on by Anonymous and other people. This is a whole new business landscape in which basically companies didn't want to open their kimonos, so, citizens and consumers have kind of reached up and grabbed one side each and pulled it open themselves.
So the behavior of those particular banks, you think, is not a bellwether of the long-term future. You're hopeful that it's not. You're saying that it was their behavior and they got away with it, and they're getting away with it. I'm just there. To me, it looks to me like actually the auto companies have shifted a bit.
Well, but
it looks to me like the banks, who were the most visible, have not. And I'm curious how you factor that in. And one thing you're saying is it's early.
I'm saying it's early. The second thing is you need to look at the relative concentration of power, in that the power of the auto industry, which is largely broken, and I've had the good fortune to work on almost all the major US and Asian car brands. It was broken in the sense that they needed government support to be bailed out, in which case their long-standing loyalties to lobbyists and to oil and gas companies, they were sufficiently threatened that they had to shift gears to compete to what the market and consumers were demanding, which was more socially responsible vehicles, environmentally friendly, and so on. So it had to come to breaking point before that change would occur. And then suddenly, a short 2 years later, the auto industry is now this green tech race. Unimaginable 4 or 5 years ago, but it shows you that when you get to that point of critical breaking point, that industries can shift quickly when they're no longer beholden to vested interests or special interests, but actually to what the market now demands. In terms of that, banking, the concentration of power is most acute there. And I think the alignment between business and political interests is most tight and dense there, in which case it will require even greater tension to shift anything. So much so that you're now seeing corporate America, which has also got its own ills, pointing the finger through CEOs like Howard Schultz at DC itself and saying, this is broken. So we're suddenly seeing a system coming. It's almost like a car and everything's starting to rattle, and we don't know if the front left wheel will fall off first or whether it's the nut behind the steering wheel and the rear vision mirror just broke off and there's steam coming out of the hood. But everybody's got a problem, and every one of those is a talking point, but seen together, this is a vehicle that really dramatically needs to change if it wants to keep going.
Okay, so one thing I hear in there is that the banking industry is a bit of an exception. Their influence is the greatest, I would say, oil being a close second, pharmaceuticals up there too, but their influence is the greatest. And for one thing, you are much less likely to go put your money in a Japanese bank than to buy a Toyota.
That's true. What I would say, though, is that there is a trust factor that comes with U.S. banks, but even though it's a small crack in the wall, the $4.2 billion worth of assets that were transferred to credit unions on Bank Transfer Day 3 weeks ago?
Say it again, that number.
$4.2 billion.
Okay.
And it was 750,000 people opened up credit union accounts.
On one day?
No, on one day, or so, over the period of a week.
Okay.
I think it was a composite for the month. And $4.2 billion is nothing in the grand scheme of things. And you know what? In my conversations with some gentlemen in Wall Street and ladies, they do see 2008 as a necessary thinning of the herd, and it's just business as usual. And there were some brokers in the UK who received a lot of publicity when they went on television and said, we're going to make money on the downturn when it collapses and on the upturn. Their mindset has not changed, which is why I come back to this point that unless we change their incentive schemes, unless we impact their bottom line, unless we as customers and as citizens take it upon ourselves as a shared responsibility that we need to affect what they care about most, their bottom line, I don't think anything's going to change.
So, let's move to the next point. Simon Mainwaring, author of We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World. Some of the ways in which we can do what you were just saying, unless we, in large numbers, unless we, with consistent effort, band together to stand for what we believe in and stand against what we don't want. What are some of the ways that that's been happening, some of the ways you see it happening, et cetera?
Absolutely. And, you know, we've been talking largely in a sort of adversarial way, us against them, till now. But my solution is much more with a view to a partnership, because we're all in this together. So I'll include those on the corporate side as well. So going down the sort of ladder in the corporate chain, a CEO must recognize that if a company wants to amplify its message through social media channels, it has to be meaningful to its customers. Edelman, the largest PR firm in the world, had a report recently, their Good Purpose report, that said 86% of global consumers want companies to put society's needs on the same level as business needs. So this is not a perception issue. This is a business challenge. They need to rise to that challenge. So CEOs need to respond like Howard Schultz, like Phil Knight, like Indra Nooyi of PepsiCo and so on, who have all built purpose into their for-profit business models. Secondly, shareholders need to realize that while their number one interest is their bottom line, and rightly so, that a short-term view can promote a long-term disaster if they're not careful, in which case they've got to demand off their directors and the way they manage the business a larger perspective in terms of time and also the well-being of society and the planet at large. Thirdly, as a citizen and as a customer, we need to use social media channels to have our voices heard. We need to celebrate those companies that are being socially responsible, and we need to admonish those who are not. We saw this with the BP oil spill, where everyone was punishing BP, and Greenpeace did that design your own BP logo competition, and thousands of people sent in things, and many examples. Nestle with Kit Kats, and they were getting palm oil that was deforesting an area that was threatening orangutans, and so there was a huge protest, both at the annual shareholder meeting and otherwise, things like that. And then we also finally, as citizens and consumers, need to assume responsibility as well. So we need to say, great, I'm going to be more mindful in my shopping rather than mindless in my consumption. And that means we need to take advantage of these social tools that are out there. And I'll just run through a list of a few of them. Firstly, consumers can now, as they're walking down a shopping aisle, you're a busy mum, you're a busy dad, you've got kids in tow, or you're working late at the office, you want to discharge your responsibility as a parent, but you also want to do what you can to sort of at least not make the problem worse. So you can download a mobile application called Good Guide, and it's a barcode scanner. It's in your phone. You point your smartphone at the barcode of a product, a carton of orange juice, and it will give you a social benefit rating that is an aggregate of its environmental impact, its carbon footprint, its corporate social responsibility initiatives. So just like the person at the checkout, you can vet every item that you put in your shopping cart before. So you'll still get what you need, but you'll also do it in a way that makes you feel good about supporting the brands that are socially responsible.
So I know you're going to give me more on a list, yeah. but the name of that app again?
Goodguide.com.
Goodguide.com.
One word, goodguide.com. And you'll see.
And how broad does it go?
They have over 600,000 products right now, and brands are falling over themselves to be involved because they know that this is a way to position themselves as meaningful to
Very
their
good.
customers.
And just as I'm sitting here thinking, well, God, how long would that take?
Right.
But the fact is, you do that measure once, and you kind of go, okay, this is the brand of this I trust.
Absolutely.
And then you do it on, now you're having to buy some other product. You do it. You don't have to do it every time.
No,
you
just
shop for every
reconstitute
item,
your list, and you feel better about yourself.
You just now have more information.
And we're mindful consumers. Secondly, you can go to online platforms like brandkarma.com. And brandkarma.com aggregates all the research about a company and its social responsibility, and also has 30% of that aggregate for customer opinions, where people say, if you go there, you can put in Google, Apple, Nissan, Coca-Cola, whatever it might be, and you'll get a rating for the impact of that company on society. And so if you're doing a big ticket item like a washing machine, or you're going to buy a car, you can make sure you're supporting a company that's being socially responsible. So that's, brandkarma.com. So those two are in the sort of punitive sense, like how do we keep them honest? In the positive sense, if you're an employee, if you're a CEO, if you're a shareholder, you can direct the company's attention to platforms like SocialVest or SocialVibe. SocialVest is a platform, socialvest.com, where you go there and basically if the product is included in their list of items, a certain proportion of the sale of the proceeds of that item will go to a cause of your choice. So if you, Terence, want to support a pet shelter, you can go there and buy something from Gap and Target, both of whom are on the list, and 1 or 3%, whatever they nominated, will go to the charity you chose from their website. So it's a platform that makes it very easy for a brand to sign up and make a contribution that's meaningful to their customers because they're the ones that chose the cause.
The name of that one again?
That one is called SocialVest.
Socialvest.com.
Yeah.
And how many companies involved in that?
They have over 300 major brands on there.
And these are
like
major
Target,
brands. So, yeah.
Like Gap.
Yeah.
iTunes is on there from Apple. Everyone that you recognize.
Now, if I don't go there, they take the full 100%.
Well, if you go into a store and buy it regularly online or in a store, then
right. But
no cause gets anything.
So when I use this, what do? I click it once, and from then on, when I buy.
No, it's a credit card system. When you pay through your credit card, the system is set up that proportion will be taken and given to the cause of your choosing. And there's another equivalent that I would share with you, which is called SocialVibe, socialvibe.com. And basically, what brands are doing now is saying we need to compete for your attention. We need to pay you for your attention. So if you see a Best Buy ad on a web page, wherever you are, you're looking at web page Best Buy ad, if you click on that ad, Best Buy will make a donation to a cause of your choosing. So they're effectively paying you for your attention, but paying a cause that you care about. And that's socialvibe.com. And I mentioned these two, SocialVest and SocialVibe, because these are pre-existing platforms that allow brands to make a contribution very easily, while things like Good Guide and brandkarma.com make it very easy for consumers to keep brands honest. And when you look at the emergence of these tools in the context of a tough economy, of social media, of a demand for greater transparency, accountability, authenticity, then you start to see a shift going on in the conversation in the marketplace, which is we as consumers only have one piece of leverage, which is our dollars in our wallet. And if you want us to support you, we want social responsibility in return. And that's why you see Pepsi Refresh Project, Coca-Cola
now,
Open.
People may not know what that is. Pepsi Refresh.
So the Pepsi Refresh Project, Pepsi, a mainstay of the Super Bowl for 20 years that had the big commercials with the celebrities. They pulled out of it 2 years ago and launched a Pepsi Refresh Project where basically they said, send us your ideas for how you'd like to see some positive social change. And we'll take the money we're going to spend on the Super Bowl and we'll put that towards your cause. And they gave it in $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, $50,000. And the community voted for which one of those ideas got up. Or if you look at Patagonia has just launched.
Let me just say on the Pepsi Refresh, I have a button
right
that every day, because you can vote every day, every day I can vote for 5 charities or causes, and at the end of, I guess it's a month, they give out their awards, and then there are a bunch of more nominees the following month.
Right.
And so this is something which is easy, takes about a minute and a half, and I know that by taking that minute and a half, at the end of the month, there's a chance that those causes I voted for are going to get some significant.
Absolutely. And, one of the great obstacles, you would say, to this whole shift in the private sector is the mindset of corporations. But the other extreme is the complacency of consumers. So none of this was going to happen until those tools are in their hand where they could do it instantaneously, seamlessly, with a click of a button, so it only took 1 second of their time. So that's what's so powerful that's going on right now. There is so much discontent. There is so much challenge to those existing voices of authority or the concentration of wealth, yet the tools to hold people accountable are coming as well. And so other examples, the Patagonia launched the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, where they basically said, Patagonia, always well known for their support of the environment, they said we can only help the environment so far on our own. We need to get our peers involved, our competitors. So they launched a Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which holds every member company accountable to the same sustainability index in terms of the carbon footprint of their supply chain, how they make their products, and just the environmental friendliness of the company. That group now includes 30% of the global apparel and footwear manufacturers on the planet.
That's significant.
And that's only
one out of every three, basically.
And it was only launched in April, May this year. And that includes competitors like Nike, Adidas, and Puma. It includes heavyweights like M&S and H&M and Walmart. Walmart that's reduced its carbon footprint by 30% in the last year, as well as imposing that same requirement on their supply chain. When you get that majority concentration of a shift in intention and behavior, then the rest of the industry will follow suit.
That's right. When the big players shift, others have to shift as well. I did an interview with Ed Humes, who wrote the book Force of Nature, about Walmart. And while there are still blind spots, I believe, in Walmart's overall approach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of labor, in terms of a community sometimes.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah. So that the community ends up paying for the healthcare of their workers, and they recently even reduced the number of part-time people they were covering, etc. On sustainability, they're a leader, and partially it's because sustainability is a place where doing what's best for the planet is also what's best for the bottom line.
Absolutely. That is what's driving this. There's nothing wide-eyed, naive, or unrealistic about anything we're talking about today. I believe that there is a business efficacy to reframing the intentions of a company, its purpose, its goal. Consumers now want companies to build societies that are sustainable. So they're going to support them with their product purchases. Brands want a thriving middle class that can actually afford to buy their products here and overseas. So
here's a thing. As you said that sentence, I thought to myself, well, why aren't the folks who sell products and need a middle class squeezing the banks?
I think that, like almost every small business in America, a lot of the big companies are beholden to the banks. I think it's a very dense issue, problem. I think the relationships are very, very deep. And I think, if you just take, the failure of the MF Global Fund recently, like the leveraging of a lot of companies is such that they really can't afford to make a stand as yet. So they're caught between, their consumers and their
financiers.
They're financiers in a sense, which is pretty much the situation everybody finds themselves in. And when I talk about this week of transition, I see that almost like, a shift from who's in that arm wrestle, who's got control right now. And I think, those, the consumers, the citizens, the interests of all are getting a little bit more of an upper hand.
Yeah. Well, one thing that has happened is that the number of college graduates going into finance is down.
Right.
It hit an enormous, I had been quoting that Harvard grads was at 20%.
Right.
And I read something that I think in 2008 it was 50%.
No,
which is astounding. I mean, when I went there, I think it was probably 10%.
No, it's incredible. And, you've got Harvard and you've also got the Thunderberg Business Management School creating their own equivalents of the Hippocratic Oath.
Right, the MBA oath.
The MBA oath, where they actually articulate a values proposition behind the way they want to do business. So, one of the things we've left out of the discussion today is probably the driver, the millennial generation, and how they want their own future, not their parents' past, and how they really want to bring their values proposition to the value they bring to the marketplace. So when you take a macroeconomic view, when you look at a global perspective, when you look at the sort of technology drivers and the emotional and demographic drivers and put them all together, you're not crazy to think, wow, we might just be at the beginning of a sort of a larger shift that's very necessary.
These apps and websites and things which you've cited, can one find all of those? Let's say not everybody runs out and buys a book, although they can. We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media. But if they go to the websites, is this kind of information there?
What I blog about at simonmainwaring.com is all the best efforts in terms of apps, in terms of new platforms, in terms of new case studies by brands and citizen activism.
Do you link from your site?
Link from the site to all of these different.
Great.
I also, whenever I do a speech or a presentation, many of which you'll find on the site, all the slides are downloadable and they're all hyperlinked to each example, so everybody can do a deep dive.
Very
on each one
good.
of them.
So again, the two websites are.
Well, I'll give you three. What I
Okay.
would say is, firstly, the blog where you can find an ongoing sort of real-time, up-to-date examples of the best practices is simonmainwaring.com, MAINWARING. And then secondly, we're putting together a We First social branding seminar that is enabling brands to actually bring this value to life to the marketplace, to define their purpose and use social channels to scale their community and positive impact. And that is wefirstseminar.com, all one word, wefirstseminar.com.
So that's to teach corporate folks how to play this game.
But there's actually something special about the seminar. In terms of this integration of purpose and profit, every single person who goes to the seminar gets an extra ticket to invite their favorite nonprofit for free.
Right.
Because you need to scale the important work of these wonderful organizations. So wefirstseminar.com, you not only get the training you need, but you also get to support a wonderful nonprofit. And then, more information on the company is at wefirstbranding.com.
Okay. And finally, the notion, in other words, we've talked about a few notions, but if there are two key ones in what you're saying, one is the activities of consumers through social media, et cetera, to influence brand behavior, to slap their wrists when they're out of line, to change their behavior, et cetera, is one. And the other is this what you call contributory capitalism, where a percentage, I buy something, and Tom's shoes is obviously a great example, but I buy something and there's a piece of the money that I give to the company for the product, a piece of that is going to go to a cause. What's your sense of the scale of that? Because it sounds like that's the kind of thing, if I'm listening, I might go, well, that sounds like a kind of greenwashing or social washing, 1%, 2% cost of doing business.
Well, I think that's a legitimate concern because a lot of companies can give a fraction of a cent on the dollar, and then PR that to death. And that's always going to be concerned.
Yeah, when the PR costs more than they're giving, which happens.
Which happens a lot and has been leveled at a lot of the cause marketing campaigns quite fairly. And let's never make the mistake of naively assuming that companies are doing this other than to help promote their businesses. They are in business to be in business, so that's a given. But secondly, I think the most important, there's two things that every brand needs to recognize now. The first is that they can no longer be the celebrity of their community. They need to be its chief celebrant. They need to shift from treating themselves as a destination to actually treating themselves as the shoulders on which they lift their community. That's the only way they're going to drive their success in the social business marketplace. And the second thing is, as a result of that, the future of profit is purpose. Because purpose will make you meaningful to your customers, it'll improve your employee retention and engagement, and also it'll be a great tool for business strategy moving forward as a brand.
Very good. The book is We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World. The websites are wefirstbranding.com and simonmainwaring.com. You can listen to this week's conversation and many others anytime during the week by linking to the podcast. You can sign up to have it delivered to you weekly. For podcast articles, transcripts, join me in pursuit of a world that just might work. Go to terencemcnally.net or aworld@justmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement of upcoming guests and issues, sign up at the site or email me at TEMcNally, MCNALLY, TEMcNally@mac.com. Finally, thank you to Simon Mainwaring.
Thank
Keep
you
up
very
the
much
good work.
for listening. Thank you, Terence.